Good evening and welcome to the Arundel Camera Club meeting for Thursday, January 22nd. My name is John Milliker and I'm the club president for the 2025-2026 season. The Arundel Camera Club was founded in 1957 and exists to promote the arts, science, and education in all aspects and fields of photography. For more information about us, please visit www.arundelcameraclub.org. And whether you're watching us live or catching a recorded session, we'd love to invite you to join us in person as we meet every Thursday evening at 7 p.m. at the Severna Park Baptist Church in Severna Park, Maryland. Let's go ahead and do we have any members that have personal announcements to share, such as having work published, accepted into a show, winning an award, or other photography milestones? Yes, Chris.
I have a couple of pieces that are going into the Maryland Federation.
You want to come up and tell us a little bit about them?
The Maryland Federation of Art Show.
Bring them up, Christine, please.
That is from,
Can you bring the stuff up, please?
oh,
Yes. You want to come up and talk about them? We actually have the stuff you sent Mike today.
okay.
Can she introduce herself? I don't think that's
Christine Helms.
okay.
Yeah.
You want to? Let's get you a mic.
Hang on so that people online can hear.
All right. Yeah, I have two pieces that are going into the Maryland Federation of Art Digital Exploration Show starting on January 28th through February 28th. And the first one here is called Stained Glass Angel Rendered. And it's taken inside a monastery in Montmartre in France. And the sun was blazing outside and all of their stained glass was very cubistic and I loved it and it was really beautiful. So I took that and then I also merged that with Chihuly glass. So some of the swirling elements in there are a layer of Chihuly glass in there. And the next one is called Amorphous Gilded Angels, and that was taken of the vaulted ceiling in the Louvre. And, you know, it just was very transcendental in nature just to be there and see that. And then, you know, I kind of played around with different filters and stuff in Photoshop and manipulated it a bit and created that. So.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah, congratulations.
Okay, let's get back over to once Christine gets back to the streaming computer. Switch us over there. Do we have any announcements from our officers? And I think Ed's chomping at the bit. Come over and talk to us. Come on over, Ed.
Oh, thank you. Well, this Saturday is a special day. I hope it doesn't snow. Anyway, it's for the National Cathedral, and there's 3 events. During the day, you just come and visit yourself, or they have a guided tour. And then what they're going to do is they're going to take all the chairs out of the cathedral, and it's going to have a special lighting and everything. So that's in the evening. And I have a little blurb that Mike made. You did a great job in describing the whole event, and I'll pass that out so you can go on the website and actually order your tickets for the event. So that'll be a special night. Yes.
One thing to add to that, Ed.
Sure.
So on the National Cathedral's website, it says they're monitoring the weather. And it says if you've already purchased your tickets for Saturday night, January 24th, that you are permitted to attend another night this week using your existing ticket. Well, that's tomorrow night. So if you want to go tomorrow night instead of Saturday night because of the weather, then you can do that. That's what it looks like on their webpage or their Facebook site.
There's some other changes.
Thank you.
Oh, more changes.
More changes.
Jeez.
Mike, there's the mic.
I'm gonna read this out loud. Okay. Self-guided sightseeing update to sightseeing hours open until 4 p.m. Available 12 to 4. It was 12 to 5, I'm pretty sure. Tours, current ticket holders, please check your email for updates and cancellations. Availability varies by tour. The light show ends early, final entry at 7 p.m., closing at 8 p.m. Those with Saturday tickets may use them on Friday night after 7 p.m. instead See ticket holder email for details. So yes, you can use it tomorrow, but after 7 p.m.
Okay. If you have tickets, check your email. Any other officer announcements? No other officer announcements. And I didn't ask if anybody else had any personal announcements to share. Y'all are so quiet, though. That's the problem. No? Okay. Well, let's bring Christine up, talk about our upcoming schedule, and then introduce our fantastic program speaker for tonight. Here you go, Christine.
Hello. Let's see. This week, let's see, January 24th is our field trip, which we just talked about. January 29th is our print contest with the theme of open. February 5th is our hands-on night. If you're bringing something, please let me know. Okay. With the theme for hands-on night is water and abstract. We will be bringing our water drop stand. I believe we're going to try to bring our pool with splashing water for different things. And was there anything else?
No.
Our fountain or whatever it is.
We usually have enough lighting, so even if you just want to bring something cool, abstract to photograph, and you can photograph it under other people's lights, that usually works out. So if you're not bringing anything, don't not come. So come anyway, but just if you're going to bring something cool, let Christine know or whatever.
And February 12th is our next digital contest with a theme of water. And February 19th is our photo talk night. I wish Ron was here because he is the one, it was his idea. So we'll get more information on that from him next week. And he wanted me to make sure everyone was aware about the photo contest next week. So please bring your prints in, and the theme is open. And let's see. I'm sorry. Tonight, our speaker is Janet Jeffers, and she is giving a talk on water. And do you want to come up and
Sure.
introduce yourself?
Okay. I have this to.
Oh, you have that one.
Okay,
Sorry.
I've got this one. And is this already on and rolling? So, okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here. Nice to see you all again. I'll quick way of introduction for anyone who doesn't know me. I've been photographing for many, many, many years, but for the last 20 approximately, photography has been my full-time thing after it was a hobby, as I was a graphic designer for many years. And these days I mostly photograph out in nature. I focus a lot on abstraction, on getting very close, on macro, really getting into details of things to the point where sometimes it really does, stretch into illusion or mystery or abstract. You'll see some of that tonight, obviously. So it's nice to be here again. I will pull up my screen whenever we want to put it up there.
Yes, I'm letting people know. Now, if we have questions online, do you want people to interrupt you? Do you want us to interrupt you or kind of wait?
What generally works best for you?
It's completely up to you. Usually people like to be interrupted. That way,
yes, that
you
way
know
we're
where
not
it is.
bunching it all up at the end. Sure.
Perfect.
That's fine with me. That's
Excellent.
okay. There we go. So I'll preface by saying that tonight is not going to be a how-to. I'm not telling you like techniques really or methods. It looks like you're going to have a hands-on session very soon, and I think that's going to be a great opportunity to practice maybe some of the things that you see tonight if they spark your interest. So I will be showing it's all going to be my work. It's going to be sort of a variety of subjects to a certain point, but since most of my photography is outdoors in nature, I really am, focused on that aspect of photographing water. But, I think the ideas, the concepts can apply to even, if you're making a little home studio and have buckets of water and lights and things, you can achieve a lot of the same sort of ideas and effects. So just keeping that in mind. So water, of course, has been one of the most photographed subjects in the world. It's no wonder, since it's the most abundant substance on the surface of the earth. It's often a prominent element of landscapes and, of course, seascapes, but it also defines and punctuates many other scenes. But far beyond being an element in a landscape, water has nearly infinite possibilities as a photographic subject. It can be explored in a wide-angle sweeping view or a close-up in a macro shot, anything from, an ocean to a tiny drop of water. So, it can be represented in motion or in stillness. It can convey a variety of moods and themes and ideas, and it all depends on how you approach the subject of water. It can even be photographed in any of the three main states of matter, of course, liquid, solid, and gas, in the forms of either regular water, ice, or mist or steam. And water is an excellent subject for exploring abstraction and illusion. Since the nature of water is constantly changing, there are just endless opportunities and challenges for a photographer. And this photo where I'm just, filling the frame with water. This is on Lake Michigan, and the sun was going down. It was pretty low, kind of shooting against the sun. So it's backlighting the splash in the water. And I just loved the colors and the energy of that little splash. So this is a case where, water is the entire subject of the photo. And I was really embracing the sort of dynamic mood by photographing it this way. So this is a very early photograph of mine. When I was thinking about, water and thinking about this presentation, I photographed something recently that reminded me of this picture. And I took this, it may be 35 years ago. I think it was over 30 years ago, because I think it was before I met my husband. And this was one of a small collection of images I took to a gallery owner to get some feedback way back in the day. And it was in Baltimore. He's not there anymore. And he looked through my prints, and they were pretty straightforward. A close-up of a flower, some very, a sunset, pretty typical things that you photograph when you're getting started, getting serious. With my Pentax K1000 in my film. And he stopped at this one, and he came back to it, and he said, here's where I think you're getting into something. He's like, you're starting to go in a direction here, and keep pursuing that. And it's funny because I've remembered that all these years later, and I took that to heart. It took me a while maybe to go through a bunch of subject matter and but the point being that I think this photograph is where I started to really see in a way that took in, reflection and shadow and light in a way that kind of plays with your perception and maybe creates a bit of an illusion, because all these things are on the same plane in the photograph, but it's not that way in real life. So it was just an interesting thing that this connects directly to what I do now all these years later. So, again, using water to explore abstraction and something surprising, a bit surreal.
So that's a reflection.
Yeah, that is.
All of it reflection, or some of it?
I think, it's been long enough that I think it is all reflection, but I think the leaves at the top were in shadow, so they're dark, reflected on the water, and I'm looking kind of straight down, so that the trees in front of me on the other side of the water. I think this was in Loch Raven up in Baltimore. So yeah, I don't recall exactly, which is, and I think it is interesting that we can't necessarily tell whether the top is a reflection or not. I think it is because I see, it might just be on the print because I took a picture of the print. There's some little remnants of something going on at the top of the frame, but I think that's the print itself. So qualities of water as, you know, a photographic subject in the landscape. You know, water here as part of a larger scene, but it's a very important part. You know, when we're including water in a scene, the idea is to, you know, be really intentional and really thoughtful about the role that the water plays in a scene. And in this case, it's half of the image. It's, you know, divided pretty neatly in half with this mirror image. This is in the Yellowstone River. And actually, it's, when you think about it, it's got water in a couple forms, because not only is it the water of the river with the tree's reflection, but also the misty sky there. So you're seeing water in the form of mist as well. And because it's very steamy, that water is actually quite warm because of the geothermal features underneath. So it was I liked the way that, you know, it's a very peaceful, this is actually a color photograph, but it looks monochromatic because the light is so muted. So just an example of, you know, half of the frame is water used in a very intentional way. The water is a very important part of the scene, and it creates a sort of a mirror image with a very, very calm, very peaceful vibe. Another case where, you know, this is a scene that's very, very quiet, very minimalist. This is looking out over the Gulf of Mexico from a little plane that was taking me to Dry Tortugas National Park, which was just a fascinating, incredible experience on its own. But flying over the water, I was just struck with, you know, the water, just this beautiful turquoise field, and then the clouds overhead. And again, you know, there's a lot of water in there. It's the only subject between the clouds and then, you know, the Gulf itself. So we, you know, I composed it to really just take advantage of that and creating a mood with the water. And then when we're, you know, talking about a different kind of landscape, the water again is a really important part of the scene, but it's not the main player. It is a supporting actor, because we've got the rock arch, the sunset, but the water is a very important component that provides this reflective surface for the light. The light just sort of, it gives your eye a place to travel into the photograph and then end up at that sun over the arch. So the water is, it's very, you know, timing this, you're trying to take advantage of where the waves are so that you get, you know, the line of light that you really are looking for so that it achieves what you want. In this case, that meant waiting for some of the waves to go back out a bit, so it would just get that shine on the sand. So that's, you know, again, using water, it's not necessarily the main player in the photograph, but it's a really important part of what makes it work. And in an area very close to the last photo, this is all in on the Oregon coast, another sunset photograph, but a very different one. And this is there's a lot happening in this picture. The sky is very busy and it's really dynamic and beautiful. There's clouds, the color, then there's the rock on the horizon out in the water. So I wanted to capture the water in this case, not all soft and smooth. I didn't want to use a long exposure to, you know, for those silky waves. I wanted it to show the texture of that splash because it almost echoes the shape of the clouds above. It's kind of a counterpart to the texture in the sky. We have the texture in the water. So I chose that very intentionally. So again, just, you know, making the choices consciously and not just letting the water be a secondary part of the picture, but something that you choose how exactly you want to represent it in the image. And yet another where I've chosen a very deliberate choice of composition that emphasizes the water. This was in Antarctica as our ship was departing. And of course, you've got the landmass covered with snow. There are these stripes in the clouds, which is a great scene in itself. But I decided to frame this with the wake of the ship. I wanted to capture that texture, and then the lines of the reflection curving into it. I thought made for a more interesting, more dynamic picture than just a very straightforward horizontal landscape shot that just concentrated on the mountains and the background. So most of the picture is water, and it's a really important part of it. And I actually do have a version of this. I also zoomed in and I shot a photograph. I didn't include it in this, where it's just the water part and not the top. And it's just a very abstract study of those two textures of the water. So, thinking about what you want to convey with the photograph and then framing the water and shooting it in a way that emphasizes the quality of it that you're feeling. What kind of energy does the water have, and how do you want to convey that in your photograph? So I do a lot of my landscape photography. I actually don't frame with the sky. A lot of times I like to make a composition that is a little bit more mysterious, that might make you take a second glance to figure out what's going on. A little bit of abstraction in a landscape, I think, can be interesting. And water can play a really significant part of that. And in this image, the water is not even half of the frame, but to me it is the most important part. And the water is framed by the rock all around it. This is the Colorado River just outside of Page, Arizona. And the sun was coming up, so the light that you're seeing in the water is the light hitting the cliffs behind and reflecting onto the water with the blue, and then the shadow on the rock as well as the sun is coming up. And I just chose a way to frame it that included the little green shrub in the foreground, just providing some context. But the land is mostly, in this case, working as a bit of a frame, for a bit of a window for that reflection in the water. Again, the water is creating a shape here. This is very much a study of shape and texture. I composed again without the sky. This was out in the Palouse in Washington State. And I just like the way in this little, channel in toward a reservoir, I think, the reeds and the shadows, and then there's all that texture on the surface of the water, but you could still tell it's water because the blue and the reflection of the clouds. So it's a very textural image, but you've got that triangular shape in it as well. So, emphasizing the form, the shape, the color, the texture of the water was just something I was doing in this particular instance. So that's, it's a way that you can think about water in your compositions. And a very distinctive shape. This was in Iceland, and we were in an area where these little pools of water were reflecting the sky. And the sky, of course, had, great clouds in it. And when I spotted this one little pool shape, it just reminded me of an eye, and I thought it was so interesting. And I found an angle on it that showed part of the sky and part of the clouds, so you can kind of tell what it is. And I liked the way the rocks around the edges give you little hints of what it is, but it's still a fairly abstract image. And again, using these elements to frame the body of water sort of emphasizes the shape and act as a window or a frame. Water, when you're photographing water, sometimes you'll notice, it seems very opaque. It seems like you don't see much beneath it. Might be because of the texture of the water. It might be because of, it might be cloudy. Then there are some cases where the water is just so clear that you get a very real sense of depth to it. And there are also ways where you can be photographing it with a polarizer, where that will cut down reflections on the water. It'll cut down glare so you can really see what's underneath the water. This was in Greenland, and the iceberg, the old adage about 10% of the iceberg is what you see on top, and there's so much more underneath. This picture gives you just a hint of that, and I think that it shows depth really well. When you start seeing that gradient in the colors, where it goes to the dark greens and blues as the depth gets deeper, conveying that in a photograph can be a really interesting way to give the whole scene depth. And likewise, this is in Yellowstone National Park, just looking down into one of the geothermal pools. And again, where the color gets really dark there along that one seam is where you're kind of looking, down into the pool. It sort of curves down from the viewpoint. So you can't really see how deep it gets, but it gives you a little hint, just kind of teases your eye a little bit and gives you that impression of depth. So that's something interesting that can be explored through the clarity of the water.
I have a question.
Sure.
How did you take that? How close are you or far? Did you have your camera? You go I don't know.
This was a while ago. I think, of course, it was from the boardwalk, because I'm not going to be one of those people. I think I was, leaning out over the boardwalk, trying to, sort of. I don't recall even what lens I was using, because it's been a while. But it's a really good question of, I just remember that I was able to get a little bit of distance, reaching a little bit, and I could probably do better now because the camera I have now, it's mirrorless, and I can reach out. I can still see the screen to frame, and I can reach further out. Maybe I need to go back and try.
I noticed in a couple of your photos that you can't tell how far or close you are. I know you brought up the abstract part, but
yeah.
Even the one that was an eye, I was I can't tell if she's up in the sky taking the picture.
Right.
Is it the puddle this big? So.
Right. And I think that was a fairly good sized puddle,
right.
But, with a little bit wider angle to get the whole thing in there. But I do sometimes really enjoy that, kind of playing with your sense of perception where, you don't know right away how big this thing is. And it just makes you look a little longer. It makes you ask questions. And I do enjoy that aspect of abstraction.
I was looking at the rocks in that one. I was are those boulders or are those?
Right. If I recall correctly, they were, this kind of, you could pick them up with your hands. They weren't huge. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Reflections in the landscape and water. There are so many ways that reflections can be really fun to play with. And, we tend to think okay, the mirror perfect reflection is sort of the gold standard. We want that really beautiful, where you can't even tell it's a reflection kind of idea. But this photograph was a lesson for me, and some other things that I've talked about in some other presentations. I can't remember if it's been with this group or not. But this is in the North Cascades, and I hiked up this one trail. I was above the timberline at this point, and the whole way, I can't remember the name of this lake either. I keep spotting, this mirror perfect reflection in this lake that I'm getting higher and higher. I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be really good soon because I'm going to be above the tree line. I'll be able to see through there and get this amazing reflection of the mountains and the trees in this lake. And then some other folks came up on the trail behind me and started throwing rocks in the water. I was like, oh, really? And I was so irritated. But then I just sat there and watched. Okay, let's see what happens. And this is, my reminder to myself to, don't always pre-visualize everything. Sometimes you got to get the expectations out of your head and respond to what is happening now, because you might be pleasantly surprised that an even better opportunity is coming up. And in this case, I just watched the ripples and I thought, well, wait a minute, this is kind of interesting. So I took some photos with the rippled reflection instead of the perfect reflection. And I framed it so that these trees were framing it instead of the whole view with the sky and everything. And it's more abstract this way, but I do think it turned out to be an interesting photograph this way that was not as predictable as what I had envisioned going in there. So just, a thought about reflections and how they don't have to be so straightforward.
Did you wait long enough for them to go away and get your?
No. I think they had a dog, and there was a lot of splashing at one point. I thought, okay, that's fine. This is what it's meant to be. I think I got some other photos that were nice, but this was my big lesson. Reflections, again, sometimes when you've got things that are in the foreground and in the reflection, it can really play with your perception. And I've always thought that this was, I took this photo myself, and there have been times when I look at it and wait, what part of this is a reflection and what part of this is not? Because it's not totally clear, but I like that mystery of it. And it looks a little surreal. It almost looks like pieces were cut and pasted over top of it because of the nature of the light in that scene and just the way it all came together. This was up in Vermont, and I think that river was flooded. I think normally those trees are not so close or in the water. And just because that rock, the reflection of the rock makes that shape, it just emphasized this sort of surreal aspect of it. So thinking about, what reflections can do, partial reflections, interrupted reflections, all of those things can, really make a difference in a scene. Yes?
I have a question about composition.
Mm-hmm.
How do you? I have a question about your composition, especially with reflections. How do you plan, what to keep? Since reflections, they stretch, right? A lot of the time. You see with the trees. How do you decide what to kind of keep, where to cut off? What looks pleasing to you? Because I assume a lot of times you do have to cut things off.
It's a great question. It depends very much on the scene and what seems balanced and what part of it I want to emphasize and what part I want to de-emphasize. So it changes from one scene to the next. And frankly, too, I will often photograph a scene like this, framing it different ways. I think I photographed this vertical as well as horizontal. I think at one point I had the rock further over towards the center in the composition or further over towards the side. I'll frame it in different ways that I think might work. And then when I download the pictures and I'm looking at them, that's when I can really analyze like which one of these really worked the best. It's not a very straightforward answer, but it's so dependent on the scene. And in this case, I think, because of the reflected trees in the background, they're sort of secondary. They're kind of supporting the impression that this is, a big field of reflected, water in the background. But the trees in the foreground, those strong vertical forms and the white rock are my main thing. So I wanted to have those a certain way.
I was going to say I like the balance of the gold-colored reflections behind the rock
Yes.
And as the judge would say, I wish I could have seen the trees that reflection came from. Did you take any wider shot that captured those trees? Do you know? It doesn't always help to have the
It
image and the
doesn't-
reflection,
yeah,
but
sometimes it does, and sometimes it feels like a distraction, and it's sort of there's no right or wrong answer. It's just, what do you want to say with the particular image? And sometimes you might want to have the larger view that includes the source of those reflections. And other times, and I'll talk about this, a little bit more in here too. Sometimes, no, you want it to be more about the illusion, and you want to fill the frame with, something that just supports that.
This reminds him of a surreal picture where a horse is going through the woods.
Yes.
And some of it is,
I know.
I wonder if you took the trees that are in the foreground and pushed them behind the rock, what you would get.
I know the picture you're talking about. It's very famous. I don't remember the artist, but I know the one you're talking about. And I've thought of that too. It's a similar effect. Yeah, I'm so glad you picked up on that. And the reflections too. This entire everything in this is a reflection. This is at Mount Rainier, and of course, since it is a reflection of the mountain, I've shot this the other way around. But since in this framing of it, I didn't include any of the surroundings, and it's just the water, I decided to flip it right side up or upside down so that it looks more like, almost like a painting of the mountain, because the texture in the water, there are all these reeds in the water. And to me, they look like rough brush strokes. So, in order to kind of emphasize that painterly quality, the reflection gave that impression. So I just went with flipping the image around and showing it that way. So that's another way the reflections can be played with for, an effect. In this case, we're looking at a reflection where we can also see what's beneath the water. This was in France this summer. The name of the town just escaped me. I'll come to it. And this is a canal, and then there are these, houses and buildings along the canal reflected in the water. The light was very soft, so you weren't getting a real strong reflection. When the light is softer, usually that reflection is a little less defined. And I think I might have added some clarity to this just to bring out a bit of it. But you can see the vegetation in the water as well as that door and the wall that are reflected in it. And I just liked the illusion of that. And this might be another one that could be interesting if you turned it upside down too. Water in motion, freezing the action of water as in a splash. And a splash can be anything from this to, a tiny splash with a macro lens and a little body of water, because I know that, we've seen some really cool photographs where with a setup, very close and very controlled. This being, just happened to be, this is in Svalbard in the Arctic, and we were on Zodiacs as close as we were allowed to get to this glacier, pretty obviously because it was actively calving. And we were lucky enough that, we heard a big crack and we knew that a big piece was coming off, and watched it come down into the water, and it created this big splash. The splash is higher than the glacier was. In fact, it's, you might be able to see maybe on the screen, they're actually very large birds, but they look very small on the screen, little birds flying out of it. So, a very, and here, of course, I'm shooting with, a fast enough shutter speed to freeze some of the movement of that explosive splash, but to still give it the impression of the movement of it as well. Another type of splash, and again, using a fast shutter speed to really freeze the action of those drops. I am not typically a horse photographer, but when I was in France this summer, it was an artist retreat. We got a day to go down to Camargue and photograph these famous white horses that they lead through the water. And I didn't think I was going to really get anything from it. I was like, I'm just going to be here and enjoy this. And I ended up getting a couple photographs that I really liked. And this was one of them where, you know, the main subject of the photograph, of course, is the horse. But the water is a very important element of it. And I've you know, composed it and shot it in a way that emphasizes the movement of the water and the very active, dynamic you know, mood of it. And even getting that a bit of the reflection in the bottom of the frame, you know, emphasize it as well. Yes.
You look very, very close to the horse, like you're going to be trodden over. So
actually,
is it a long lens?
It's a long lens.
Oh, okay.
I'm zoomed in. No, my lens was muddy after that. No, actually, no, it was a long lens. So all the more reason why I was pleasantly surprised that I got some photos there that I was really happy with. I also got eaten by mosquitoes, but you know, that's the price you pay. Another example of, you know, the splash sort of defining the action and the gesture in a photo. And of course, the main subject is the fisherman. This was in Cuba. And, you know, just saw him doing his thing and thought, oh, that'll be a, you know, a neat opportunity to sort of capture a gesture there of him, you know, putting out his net. And I just, you know, shot some quick frames, and I liked the one best where you actually see the splash of the water. So, you know, the water here being that supporting actor that also really represents, you know, the gesture and the movement in the photo. So, you know, defining, you know, having a defining moment that is conveyed through the use of the water and how you use the water. Is, you know, a big part of maybe even photographing people.
The water's awful shallow. What was he catching?
I'm not exactly sure. I saw lots of little small fish in that water, in that area, but I don't know what exactly he was getting there. And my Spanish is not good, so I didn't get to ask him. Water in motion, different kind of water in motion, sort of freezing the movement of water in streams and rivers. And this kind of movement of water, it's not as splash, but it's rippling, it's flowing. And when you freeze the movement of that kind of water, it can really have some interesting effects, distorting the shapes of what's beneath and emphasizing colors. So I like the abstraction that comes from, sometimes I'll just shoot lots and lots of frames as the water is running across a surface that I find interesting underneath and see what happens. And this was in Glacier National Park in Red Canyon. Pretty obvious. So the rock is all red underneath, really beautiful. And there was this one sort of bluish gray stone sitting in there. And I just tried some different framings of it and shot a bunch of frames. And I liked the ripples in this one. It just sort of, the texture and the movement and the color I thought were really fun. So, you know, it's just another approach to, you know, moving water, freezing that movement. Also in Glacier, this was in, I forget the name of the, near McDonald Lake, I think it is. There's a, you know, river, the water is beautifully clear. And underneath are just all these stones that are so colorful, and it's just incredible. And it looks different when you're watching the water just running over it. And when you freeze that motion, you know, with a fast shutter speed, you just get these abstracted, you know, almost like stained glass. So it's a fun thing to play with. It's very abstract, but it really can be a very dynamic effect. Yellowstone, another one from there. And, in this case, you can see the green vegetation underneath the surface of the water. This is pretty shallow. It's just, that water's not deep at all. And then the ripples where you see, the light from the sky just barely kind of reflecting off of it. And the yellow, of course, is in the rock itself. And sometimes I will even find that, like, when you freeze the motion of the water, these shapes come into play. And I always thought this one reminded me of, especially with the color too, some sort of statue. It's like a man's profile. You see like the nose, the chin, a hairline. So, just these shapes and other forms can be frozen in the movement of water. It can be really unexpected and fun. So I don't know if you see like the hair at the top, and then the nose is on the left side of the frame, and then the chin down below, and then his neck kind of goes down to the bottom right corner. Always thought of it as the man in the stream. So water not in motion. Still water is a whole different kind of effect. You can still do really interesting, beautiful things. It's a different mood. Still water can have a very Zen kind of effect. Reeds in the water are really popular, way to kind of concentrate on, the forms and that sort of Zen feeling. I processed this one in monochrome just to kind of emphasize that feeling. This is right down in Annapolis. This was out in Minnesota somewhere, where again, the reeds just create this, nice graphic counterpoint to the soft colors of the water. And this is, more a combination of ripples in the water. So you've got a variation of color and of texture, and then the reeds, there's a little bit more action in those reflections. But it's still, it's a nice combination of graphic, but still calm because of I think the color palette, and the, and the content. It's still sort of a nice, gentle kind of mood that's created. Whole different kind of approach. Light on the water, especially if the light, when you're kind of shooting against the sun, against the light. And I think in this case, probably at like, F29 or something like that, just so you get these really strong pinpoints of light that are like starbursts. And, the scene itself is not, the duck, it's not a super interesting scene if you didn't have those many little pinpoints of light. So I was just taking advantage of the water to create an effect here that's more dynamic and more interesting. And, this where, the water is more of a supporting player. It's in the background. It's not even terribly apparent that there's water there, except for the fact that you see those pinpoints of light that let you know that the sun is glinting off something in the background. And that's down near Annapolis. And just, I like the effect of the tree leaning out over the water with those little starbursts. More shooting against the sun into the water, but this is so shallow. The water's so shallow that it's just just sheen over the sand. This is on a beach out in Oregon. And I was exposing it, kind of underexposing it to really hang on to the highlights where the sun is shining. The sun was low and it's shining across the sand. So I was exposing it so that those highlights would not be blown out and there wouldn't be any really bright spots, but just really emphasizing the form, those just gentle waves across the image. And you wouldn't necessarily immediately think that this is water, except for the fact of, how reflective it is. And it's just covering the sand. I think that it had gone out at low tide. So, exploring sort of light and shadow and, playing with the perception of what the water is, portraying it in different ways. And the angle, of course, can make, a really big difference. I think in this case, I was probably crouched down kind of low so that you could, see the light really scraping across. Playing with your angle to the water can make a big difference in what you pick up. Again, first glance, you might not even realize that there's water in this photograph because you see through it so much. This was out in Utah in Natural Bridges National Monument. And this is literally water under the bridge. It is a little pool that had formed right under one of the bridges. And you wouldn't necessarily expect to see water there, but there was, and it was, of course I see water anywhere and, anywhere I don't expect it. I'm like, okay, how am I going to photograph this? So even in the desert, and you can see in the top of the frame in that sort of green part, there's a reflection of the rock wall above. And the actual water line is probably around the middle of the picture, about where that sort of orange bit meets the more yellowish tone. I think that's where the water starts. And then in the foreground, it's just the sand. And you see the patterns of where the water had been and had just, been drying up gradually as time went on. And it created this really lovely gradient of color and, varying color and varying texture. Another example of water and sand in a completely different location. This is in Annapolis. I think over at Waterworks Park or one of those. And it's very shallow. This is just, on the edge of a little stream, and the water had receded a little bit. So on the right, we see the sand with the little reflection, just where the light was hitting, where the sand is still damp, but had kind of receded, so that creates those little waves. And then on the left side of the frame is, you can still see the texture of the sand below, which I think is kind of cool. But the surface of the water is reflecting what's above my head, which is branches and leaves in the fall. So you see that I just thought it was an interesting play of color and texture and the contrast of two different surfaces. And the result's pretty abstract. So just, another thing that I was playing with. Water drops, drops and droplets. This picture I took in Ladue Gardens, 98% of the frame is not water. It's, it's a leaf. And I think the leaf even on its own would be, a pretty cool macro shot because it does have an interesting, the colors are interesting, the shape and texture are interesting. But those two little pinpoints, those two little drops of water were what really captured my attention because they're a little extra something that gives you a sense of the scale. They're a little clue to the scale. And in a way, it's a little bit of a self-portrait because if you look close enough, I'm reflected in the droplets. You can kind of see my arm up with the camera. So that's about as close to a self-portrait as I get. So, again, water it's a supporting player, but it's a little piece of punctuation on an image that I enjoyed, to give a little bit more context, a little bit more information in the photo, a little, like I said, a little punctuation. Another example of water sitting on a leaf, but this one, a little different. So it's a different mood too. That the leaf in itself, I think, is a really, interesting subject. There's a lot of texture. There's a lot of color. The light is very gentle and dark. So there's a mood there, but then this, sort of irregular puddle of water sitting in that leaf was, another opportunity to bring in something else to the image, an additional bit of depth, an additional bit of context. You can even, because of the how much depth of field I used, you can even see that, the structure of the conservatory, I think this was in Longwood Gardens, is when you look at that drop, that water, you can see the lines of the conservatory windows above me. So it's when you start looking, you see these other clues. And this was just a water drops on a shower curtain in a motel somewhere in New Mexico. I thought with the color and the light, the drops were cool. And I thought, oh, I'll take some pictures of this. And just an example of, how you can find these things anywhere when you're looking for them. And if you're paying attention to the quality of the light, choosing a depth of field, do you want the whole thing to be sharp? Do you want it to be just a little bit, making these choices and keeping an eye out, you can find lots of interesting ways to handle the water. Yes?
When you're out, when you're out looking for these photos, are you usually having like a macro lens or a mid-range zoom or primes?
I'm using a macro a lot of the time because I am, as you can tell, I am so, these days I'm very much into looking closely at things and in nature especially. So mostly lately I am using, I've got a 105 macro and zoom, it's 100 to 400 zoom that, or no, it's the 28-400, the Nikon that it's great because, it can be just walking around. I can be on a hike. It's not super heavy and I can get, some reasonable zoomed in distant shots, and then I can get a nice landscape out of it as well. So, that's mainly what I'm using these days. I've got some really wonderful prime lenses that are just sitting in my cabinet gathering dust because it's just not how I work these days. So, subjects in the water, things like fish, or in this case, jellyfish, even plants. Sometimes, the water disappears in some of these kinds of images, and depending on how you handle them, the conditions. This was at the Baltimore Aquarium, the jellyfish, where, the water is not a visible element here. You just know because of the subject that it's in the water. And in this case, a koi fish, this was at Ladue Gardens. I did some processing on this it was already pretty, it was an image that didn't have a lot of sky reflected in it, but I did sort of darken the background a bit more to really give it that quality of it's just floating in space. So, water is, the whole image is water because this is everything you see here is under the water, but the water is not actually a visible element. You don't see the surface, you don't see ripples. So it's, just another way of thinking about, water as negative space for, something to be, your subject to be floating in. And this was a similar photograph where I exposed it so that most of the water would just be shadow. And just the form of that leaf, that curl-up leaf, and that the leaf is just breaking the surface. Those little veins are just sticking out of there, giving you that sense, little hint of what's going on there. And then in this case, I love to photograph koi fish. The fish are breaking the surface, so you see the bubbles, you see the ripples. The water's disturbed, and I like to, in this case, I did want to keep some of that texture of the water to convey that feel. And then, a step more. Now you can see some things that are on the surface of the water. You can see the reflections, the ripples. The water is more active. You get a little bit more context, a little bit more information. It's not as abstract, but it tells a different kind of story. And again, this where I've just included more of the reflection of the clouds in the sky. So it's just another effect in the water. Because usually I'm trying not to get that, with the koi fish. But sometimes I think it's kind of interesting. It's a little bit more surreal. And it's more like the fish is in the sky, or the sky is more like it's got a whole different mood to it. So just, being aware that these different ways that you can approach a subject like this, depending on the angle that you're looking at it, the weather conditions, how you expose the image, and then how you process it. All those things can make a difference. And it's just, choices. Shooting through water or ice in this case, water and ice too can be so good for, creating distortions, these visual illusions and distortions. And it can be a really fun thing to explore. And I think it could, with the weather that's coming up, maybe we'll have lots of opportunities with ice to take a sheet of ice and photograph things through it. A curtain of water. And this was in Iceland, where we were at the glacial lagoon with the black sand, where the pieces of ice are washing up on the beach, and everybody was photographing the pieces of ice washing up on the beach with their tripods, and the water was moving, and I was like, and I looked around and I see the sunset, and I picked up this one. It was a pretty big chunk of ice that I noticed had a hole in it, and I carried it up the beach and I plunked it down in the sand, and I laid on my stomach so I could shoot through the ice and get the sunset. And the workshop leader was John Paul Caponegro. He walked up and he saw what I was doing. Everybody's facing the other direction. He looked at me and he went, and gave me the thumbs up. So, sometimes just, looking through the subject of water to see how it affects what's behind it, or ice in this case. Because, water does some really amazing things. This is a humble glass of water on my nightstand. And this was just with an iPhone photograph. I woke up one morning and the sun comes right in our window, and first light of the day, and it's hitting that glass and the wall behind it. And I was like, whoa, that's really cool. Look at how, just this graphic, the way it was lined up, and that refraction where it, turns the reflection around it, pretty interesting effect. So it was just a reminder to oh yeah, water does these incredible things when you look at other subjects through it. So you never know where you're going to find inspiration. This was a fountain that kind of put out a sheet of water, not little lines of water, but a sheet of water. And I think this was at Longwood Gardens. And behind it are flowers. You can see that the sort of bluish color of the flowers at the top and the greenery at the bottom. So, in this case, I'm choosing a shutter speed to just kind of turn that surface of the water into, not individual droplets, but not like a really soft sheet either. I just kind of wanted it to look like glass, almost like I was photographing through some sort of textured glass. So, exploring that quality of water can be a really interesting thing. Water in motion. There are people who photograph waterfalls beautifully with, long exposures and tripods. I don't do that very much because I'm really bad about using a tripod. I have one, I just don't use it very often. I don't particularly like it because I like to get at unusual angles to things. I'm often working at, weird angles and squatting down, and tripods usually just feel like restrictive to me. And I'm not typically big on really long exposures anyway. So this is just working handheld. I'm trying to get the rocks nice and sharp, but still have a shutter speed that's long enough to get some of that texture in the water that conveys the movement. And, same kind of thing in this, a little bit of sharpness, but that you can see texture in the water, and it's not just one silky sheet. But you can do that effect as well. There are lots of ways to do that and to handle this waterfall sort of effect. This was in Iceland, behind the waterfall, and this is from the other side, where a bit of a curtain effect. And I wanted the shutter speed to be such that you would see some of the texture in the water at the bottom of the frame and see where as the waterfall is hitting it, some of that sort of churn of the water, and everything wasn't just, blended. So it's all just, again, about choices, different ways of approaching the same subject. Handheld, again, this is in the Virgin River in Zion National Park. And I just decided to play with, okay, what happens when I shoot this handheld and have an exposure that's a little longer? And you can really, get some interesting, kind of abstracted results that do, the color, it emphasizes the color a lot. Sometimes it's very different from how the water looks when you look at it just with your eyes and it's moving. Freezing the action with the camera really does look very different. And I think it can be really worth exploring. Another one where I did a similar kind of shutter speed and just capturing the colors and the movement. And I've always liked this one because not only do you get at the top, you see a little bit of just a little edge of that rock, and then the white where it's splashing and foaming more. But the bottom of the frame, I love there's soft colors, and the texture is almost like hair or fur. It's just so finely lined across the bottom that I thought it was a really interesting effect that you don't necessarily think of as something that water would provide. So again, a source of, something more mysterious and less straightforward. It can be very interesting.
Have you tried intentional camera movement?
I have. I haven't been real successful with it with water so much. I did some with neon lights. That was pretty fun. But I've seen some people do really cool things with that. So, especially like zooming and some really neat things. Ripples in water, more, freezing the movement. I keep saying I'm not much of a something photographer. I'm not much of a bug photographer, but this is in the woods behind my house, and been hiking a lot the last few years. And this little bug on the surface of the water, I just decided to, try to capture in some way. And I really liked the way that he moved just a little bit, and those ripples froze, and the forms and the color and the movement, I really enjoyed that. So I think ripples can give you something really neat to play with. This is in Great Sand Dunes out in Colorado, and the sun was getting ready to set. It was very low, so the light is just kind of hitting across sideways on is it Medano? I think it's Medano Stream. That runs through at the base of the dunes when there's enough water there. Sometimes it's too dry, but and so in this case, you're getting that golden color from the warmth of the light, but then the blue is the sky reflected, and it's that contrast of the warm and the cool colors really emphasized by the ripples. But the whole surface is water, and I just really like that effect. Same subject, different view, just kind of showing that, different areas give different effects. So, some might be, wider, and then you'll have, a gentler sort of transition, and some look, more contrasted and a little bit more, you get more texture. So it's, again, another fun thing to play with. Ripples again in the water, this one again at Ladue Topiary Gardens. And this one, this is in a fountain, actually. The surface, they've got a big fountain pond with these lilies in them. And I just love the way it was in fall. So we're getting, the reflection of fall color in the trees, and the ripples, and the way that they're playing off of the edge of that leaf. I just thought was a really, really nice effect. So, playing with the ripples and not such a straightforward reflection can be really fun. So reflections, we're really kind of thinking about how much of the image do you want to be reflection? Sometimes leaving a little part of the actual subject that's not a reflection, kind of like that one with the rock and the trees, can be interesting. And this, this you just see like a little bit of the stem of those flowers, and most of the image though is reflection. There's a little ripple in there too, just for a little added something extra. This is a barge in Iceland, and I loved the pattern of those reflections, just that, kind of chaotic, psychedelic, but really great color scheme. But filling the frame with it just felt like a lot of pattern. So I framed it to include some of the actual barge that was creating the reflections. You get just a little, again, just a little bit of context, a little bit of a hint, and a little contrast too. So, your eye has a little bit of an idea of what that reflection is and what's going on in the picture. And in this case, just filling the entire frame with the reflection, more urban scene. And this is, buildings and signs and, just a kind of a study of color and line and texture in the form of a watery reflection. Shadows plus reflections. Sometimes you'll find a situation where a subject that's surrounded by water or in the water will create both a shadow and a reflection, and it can be really interesting. It can turn out very surreal, and this was one of those cases. This was down at Jug Bay in southern Maryland, and one of the cypress trees, which is just sitting in the water. So lots of opportunities there. I like that place. I need to go back. And the sun is, I'm kind of shooting into the sun here, so I'm behind the tree. The tree is blocking the light. So what we're looking at, we see the shadow of the tree. We're standing in the shadow of the tree. But we're also seeing the reflection of the tree as well, and the reflection of trees behind it. So there's a lot happening. And then the color, you got the shadow is cool and blue, and the places that are in the sunshine are warmer colors. So you get a lot of contrast. There's, color, there's texture, there's all these things happening in it. It's a very complex image, but the water is what enables that. And sometimes just being aware that these things are happening in the water and paying attention to them can result in something interesting. This is a really similar concept. This is, I think, at is it Waterworks or Bacon Ridge, one or the other. I think it's Waterworks. Hiking along there, and there's this fallen tree that is across the stream. And the stream, the water is, a lot of it's covered with pollen. So you see all that kind of orangey color to the left, which is, I think it's pollen. And then on the right, you see this sort of, that blue, and it's almost metallic looking. It almost looks like foil. And you'll see more of that. I've got a whole series I'll show you at the end of the presentation. There's really fascinating stuff going on in the water. And in this case, again, we've got a shadow and a reflection of that log. And it's a lot happening. There's a lot of texture. There's a lot of color variation. It's mysterious. And I just enjoyed sort of playing with that. And when you're noticing what's happening in the water, you can always, play around with that some. Sometimes, photographing reflections along with what's on the surface of the water, you can get detail in both. If, and this is probably, again, shot at like, f/29 or something, so that the clouds reflected in the water are sharp, as well as the leaves that are sitting on the water. And it almost looks like the leaves are floating in the sky. So, you can kind of create some illusions by, choosing whether you want to use a very wide depth of field or a very shallow one. Because if I were just going to concentrate on, keeping those leaves sharp and rendering the rest of it soft, it would be a very different effect. And that's what's happening here too, is that, I've got the leaves, they're just breaking the surface of the water. And then I've exposed this so that the bare branches that are basically right above my head looking down into the water, that they are sharp too. And it gives you almost the impression that the leaves are floating on that tree in a night sky or something. It's just, a little different. If I'd chosen instead to blur those branches, it would be a very different effect.
Excuse me. Are those white spot stars reflecting, or?
No, it's on the surface of the water. It was just little.
It looks like an amazing star.
It does, yes. Yeah.
The question was were the white dots stars?
No, they're on the surface of the water. And, in this case, I looked up the name of whatever that is that's floating on the water, and I can't remember it now. It was over at Davidsonville Park. And they're like little tiny red, pink, kind of almost like flowers that are on the surface of the water, like just one little part of the year. And I was fascinated with them, and I walked around just trying to kind of figure out, how to photograph them. And then I noticed that a bare branch was reflected in this little window in them, in the water. So again, we've got the surface of the water and, something that's covering it, but then a reflection that just, makes all the difference. This is in the woods behind my house. Again, a leaf floating in the water. You can tell that it's just breaking the surface. And you can kind of see that there are other leaves beneath it on the surface of the stream. But I've chosen to not have the trees in the background completely blurred in their reflection, but, just leave a little impression of, sort of the dark and light for the trees, because it was a nice graphical counterpoint to the leaf, and kind of created a sense of movement and let you know that was indeed like running water. So, talking about when I'm out, in the woods and I'm photographing these very small subjects in the water, and I think this applies to, a lot of these situations involving water, especially, moving myself, my camera, or waiting a moment or two can make a really big difference in what you're photographing. And this picture were taken only a moment apart. And I think I stepped one step to the side. And in this case, the light was hitting the leaf, and there's more shadow reflected in the water surrounding it. And in this case, the leaf was in more shadow, and what was behind me being reflected in the water had more light. So it's just a reminder that, when we're looking, just moving ever so slightly can make a big difference, and waiting just a moment can make a big difference, because the shadows really change and the conditions change.
Are you adding colors to this, to your pictures?
No,
Like
no.
blue?
No, that is the real color, and part of that is a result of something going on the surface of the water that I'll talk about a little bit more, because it's part of a series of work I've been doing for the last few years. And the water, it's a pretty cool effect, and it is just naturally occurring, and it really does. The colors are very intense because of it. It's almost like I said, almost a foil or iridescent kind of feeling. So I'll show you more of that soon. And the colors. Sometimes I have to desaturate a little bit because they're so much.
The question was if she had added any of the colors to her photos.
Yeah. So, again, the examples that I'm showing tonight, of course, are primarily from what I see while I'm out photographing nature. But, like I mentioned earlier, we can kind of take these ideas into anywhere that you find water. I think that the next picture was a bit more like, I don't typically stage things, but this was in France on that artist retreat. There was a swimming pool, and Elizabeth Opalenik, who led the retreat, wonderful photographer. If you're not familiar with her, she's amazing. Look up her work. It's just incredible, and she's a lovely person. And she had bought a bunch of flowers just so that we could photograph them, dunk them in the water, do what we wanted. And because she likes abstraction a lot too, and she does a lot of work with mylar and water and reflections and distortion. And so this was just the result of, taking some flowers and putting them in the swimming pool, next to where the water was circulating. So it was creating some ripples and some movement. So it's just, again, you can do experiments with, a bucket of water and some flowers or whatever subject matter you might have that you think could look cool. And playing with, you can move the water around, or so just, it's something to really have fun with and explore. So I'll show you, a little bit. Oh, and these are just, just some words, concepts, ideas, aspects of water to think about for inspiration that I've kind of gone through as I've been talking here tonight. And I'll finish by showing you two sort of recent ongoing bodies of work that are centered around the water that I've been working on for a few years now. And just to give you a sense of, where I am and what I'm hyperfixated on these days. One of them is reflections in marinas and, boatyards. And this photo, a lady came into my studio almost 2 years ago now with a friend of hers. And there's a print of this in my studio, and she sat and she looked at it and she pulled it out of the rack and she sat with it and sat with it. And her friend and I were chatting, and she said, I love this, but what is it? And I explained it to her. It's a boat in the water. It's in Dundalk, of all places, in a marina. And if you can see that dark line that's kind of near the middle, that's the water line where the boat meets the water. And then beneath that line is the reflection of the boat. And then to the left of that angled part, on the left-hand side of the frame, it's all reflected water from what's behind that boat. So we explained that to her, and she was like, I still don't get it. I don't see it, but I need this. So we did a custom size piece for her, and it's now in her living room. And I wonder if she's ever seen it, and figured out, oh, that, and I see it now. I don't know whether she has or not. But I like to, I just saw the way the light was hitting it. And, I like the abstraction. I like the mystery. I like that, people engage with some of these images and take their time looking at them to try to figure them out. But they also, bring something to it themselves. Everybody brings their own interpretation, which is fun.
In this particular image, I almost hope she doesn't ever realize what it is, because that would lose some of the magic.
Maybe so, yeah. And sometimes I'll tell people who visit my studio, if you want the mystery solved of some of these, let me know. I won't, but I won't explain everything to you. So, just ask. Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. Sure.
There's a dark horizontal line.
Mm-hmm.
Above it, there's a rectangular piece till it hits the boat of blue and lighter blue and peach. Below it, reflected,
Mm-hmm.
I think, are the same colors.
Yes.
That top part, the horizontal of the light blue is perfectly horizontal, yet down in the reflection, it's just fascinating. It's
it's distorted in the water, yes. And the water, it distorts the shapes, and it also distorts the colors. I think, maybe not in this one, but in a lot of the photographs I've taken in the boatyards and marinas, I have done a little bit of, sometimes, not always, a little color correction of the reflection because sometimes it comes out more greenish because of the water and, the nature of that water. And sometimes I want it to look more like the color it's actually reflecting. So in this case, I don't recall if I had to do that.
I just want to say, I love that also the reflection of the water off the boat.
Yes.
So you get the water kind of everywhere.
Yeah. Because the light hitting the water reflects on the boat itself, and you see those ripply patterns on the side of the boat, which I always like that too. And it's fun to watch those in motion. I take video of it sometimes because they're just sort of hypnotic. But they're also interesting when, the motion is frozen. You see it a lot in this one too. And in this, you see, the shadow of the ropes going through the boat too as well. So lots of, different things happening in it, but I enjoy those reflections. And there's a certain time of day when you can get this and other times when you can't. And the sun has to be behind you to get these, these kinds of reflections. I liked how in this one, the reflection seems so chaotic on the left-hand side of the frame. And then where the boat itself on the right is reflected, it looks so calm. It's just, I think, an interesting contrast. And it's all because of what's reflected in the water. There must have been something in the background there that had all those lines. just interesting play of contrast. And I like the zebra stripe effect of the black and white on this one, and then something yellow in the background. Little extra accent. And this one's a little, a little different. I think the light was going away and it wasn't sunny, and I think I did have to do a little. I think I added some contrast to this one because the conditions were not optimal, but I liked the effect enough that I was going to play with it and make it, what I saw in it. And this, is kind of looking down more next to the boat. You can see part of the boat on the right hand of the frame, just the curve of it. And I like the way that reflection looks kind of like a splash. In this case, just filling the frame with the reflection and nothing else. It's reflecting a sign. And it's so distorted that you can't tell that that's lettering really unless you look very closely, and I can kind of make out an R, I think. Yeah. More just pure reflections. And I'm just, when I'm taking these, I'm just looking for some little spark, and I'll take a lot of frames, a lot of shots. I'll do I'll frame up what I think might be interesting and just, 8. And each one will look a little different because the water's moving so fast. And I'm looking for, I go and review them after I've taken the pictures. Like one will have something that the others don't. I like how in this one you can see kind of the texture of the rope in the bottom left corner. And then there's like I think a light or something in there too that you can kind of see, like just little hints of what it is. And sometimes they're just kind of a play of color, sort of layers of color. And these were stairs with these little lights mounted underneath the stairs, and I like the reflection of all that. This was out in Vancouver Island. Fisherman's Wharf, really neat area. That's where this was taken as well. Just the sun going down, reflecting off of one of the structures there, and then the pier.
So is the sun low in most of these?
Yeah. And that as well. And this, the reflection is, getting a little clearer, more towards like mirror image. You can really make out very clearly that, it's a house there. And I like the red chair. Like it's just barely distorted. Almost looks like a fun house kind of, mirror effect. Sometimes things can be a little recognizable, perhaps a little statement. And then the next work that I'll show you, this is the last, I'll read this to you so I don't have to read it all. This is really, kind of my favorite thing of the last few years. And this is a working title. I'm not sure about the title of this body of work yet, but I did do a project statement to try to find an exhibition opportunity for it. It's an ongoing body of work that emerged from the many hours of hiking in the woods during the early months of the COVID-19 pandemic. My photographic practice is one of outdoor exploration, but being limited to areas close to home, I found myself revisiting the same walking trails over and over in a meditative practice. Seeking peace in a time of anxiety, I was also looking deeply into the familiar terrain to discover something new. Drawn repeatedly to small ponds, streams, and marshes, I observed that in areas of still water, the surface often contains iridescent colors and metallic textures. Upon researching the phenomenon, I learned that these are the product not of pollution or petroleum, but of iron oxidizing bacteria naturally produced in groundwater-fed streams. The colorful surfaces, fallen leaves, and other organic matter, reflections of tree and sky, and the shapes of rocks and stream bed all transform the water we take for granted into a source of mystery awaiting discovery. The change of seasons brings new forms, textures, and colors, and the water sometimes turns to ice. The terrain is constantly transforming, and new treasures are revealed daily. This work is a reminder that small, still moments can contain great beauty and significance when attention is paid. Now that I've resumed traveling, I continue to develop this series of photographs in water that I find in locations ranging from the swamps of the Tidewater South to the rivers of the desert Southwest. So, I mentioned earlier that, that sort of metallic, iridescent surface on the water. I think I first noticed it a long time ago and thought it was just an oil slick. And I noticed it in Iceland. And now in retrospect, that trip was a long time ago. I realized Iceland doesn't have petroleum stuff sitting in their marshes. It's geothermal heat. There's not an oil-based. So now I realize many years later, what I was seeing, this iridescent, surface of water in a little marsh in Iceland, was actually this phenomenon. And in the case of a photograph like this, so we've got the leaf is partially submerged, and you see these little pieces. It's almost mosaic-like. If you poke that surface, that sort of metallic iridescent surface of the water with a stick or with your finger, and you disturb it, it breaks apart. If it were oil or a petroleum product, it would swirl. Oil just swirls in water. This stuff kind of breaks up into these little pieces, and it's kind of fascinating. So that's you're seeing some of that effect in this photograph here. It's not real evident. The colors are not really evident in this. Some of that surface is very colorful. It's like there are different variations in that kind of surface, and this is just a little bit of it, and you can see the sky reflected in it. And then on the right-hand side of the frame, there's not much of that stuff. You see those little. It's like there's a little spot of it, but it's not covering the surface of the water. And then I love the way the leaf is kind of that it's gradually submerging into the water, and it's almost like little islands. Sometimes there's just this abrupt line in the water, and then in this case, it coincided with where that leaf had folded over and was sitting, and it almost looks like, I've stitched two pictures together, but it's just one. I just split it right, framed it so it's right down the middle. And sometimes that surface, some of it is reflecting whatever else is going on behind you, but there are different colors in it. And this happened to be more gold looking in color with this purple in it too. It was really wild. And of course, with the sort of gold color of that leaf, I liked that effect. Almost like the whole thing was burnished. I call this one heart leaf. And just, that sort of mosaic kind of, almost like terrazzo flooring or something. It's, there are big pieces and there are small pieces. And interesting effect. Sometimes it's just very colorful. And you get sort of these patches of color. And then I really enjoyed too the way that one leaf, the water was sitting in the middle of it and hadn't kind of broken the edges yet, and just a whole different effect. And you can tell that the water that I haven't saturated this because the color of the leaves, that's a very natural sort of brownish color for old leaves sitting in the water, but the water itself is very vibrant.
And it's all just natural lighting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The question was that if it was natural lighting.
And in this one, I don't know if you can see, I like how kind of in the, where that water is puddled up in the leaf, there is like almost like a little track through it. Like it almost looks like a little insect crawled through it or something. I don't know what caused that, whether it was an insect or not. And this one, I like the way that, and this is something I do play with sometimes too, is if I use a really, a big depth of field and there's, a tree trunk or branch or something, I'll start to catch the reflection of it around the surface where the leaf or whatever the object is, where it's hitting the surface of the water and it distorts it, and then you get those lines, those very defined lines, and I really enjoy that effect. It just adds a whole other dimension to the picture and gives it a very surreal feeling.
The leaf petals are curled up.
Yes.
There's a shadow underneath.
Yes, yeah. That leaf is like, that one hasn't started to submerge yet. It's just resting on the top and it is curled up. Yeah.
And I'm sorry, what are the lines? They're
It's a reflection from like what's above, above or behind in the water. Sometimes you'll see some where, it's a little bit more obvious, and I think these are a little further away. Yeah, see in this case, you can see coming down from the top is, a tree reflected, that light shape coming from the top, and then the leaf breaks the reflection into two. So you see on either side of the leaf, there's that light line that goes around it. And I decided to, shoot that so that is all clearer and not just blurry.
Do you add petroleum to the water?
No. No. That would be polluting.
You did mention it, petroleum in the water gives you those colors.
No, this is not petroleum. It's a naturally occurring bacteria. So it's, yeah. And again, you kind of see the reflection of the tree broken by the leaf that's sitting on the surface. And it's also kind of an interesting study of decay, in a way, as these leaves, fall and they rest on the surface, they still look pretty, pristine. And then as the water reclaims them, it's kind of that slow process of they get submerged and then eventually decay, and we get a whole new round next year. Yeah, this leaf is pretty far gone, but I thought it was an interesting effect, the way there are just little bits of it left. And again, playing with, the edges of the water overlapping the leaf, and I like the way that on the right, it's reflecting the blue of the sky. In this case, reflecting, it's fall, and you're getting the yellow trees behind me reflected in the water. It's very vibrant because of that almost foil-like texture of the water. And I thought that one was really crazy. That was very close up. That was kind of hard to get. But I liked just the way that, I guess, the leaf had broken the surface of the water and shifted and created that pattern, that sort of broken pattern in the water. It doesn't even look like water anymore at some point.
These are all local ponds in your area?
This is all local, yeah. Yeah, these are all local so far. Waterworks, Bacon Ridge, Broad Creek, all those areas. This is just a few weeks ago. My most recent outing. And that was, when I come across these, and I have to look closely to see these. And sometimes the colors show up better if they're in a shadow. So I will often position myself to be the shade and photograph these, in the shade of my own body, which sometimes means I'm balancing over streams and things like that. So. No, but that would be interesting. I think that could be something really fun to experiment with. The water between the rocks. This is over in Broad Creek where they've done all that restoration work before it had filled up. Of course, now the water's very low because we've been in such a drought. And this, playing with the that stick was just, sticking out over the surface of the water. And if you look closely to near the end of the stick, and I didn't even notice this when I took the picture. It wasn't until I downloaded it onto my computer. There's a little ladybug on the surface of the water. And, again, the play of the reflections. In this case, I've, left the trees that are reflected in the water. I wanted them to be pretty sharp. Almost gives the impression that black leaf that's sitting on the surface of the water is part of the trees above. And here, just the surface of the water is just covered with those little kind of mosaic-like pieces. And I just wanted, I loved the bare branches with it. Almost like a starry sky at night.
So late fall is an ideal time for these.
Winter. I'm out a lot in the winter. Late fall, early spring. Summer is no good. There's just too much vegetation, too many ticks, too many mosquitoes, too much sweat. This was just insane. This is just to kind of, I think this was over, I want to say Beverly Triton Park. I think it was over in that area, and really unusual. I mean, the texture, there's actual like depth to it. It almost looks like it's crocheted or something. It's really wild. Sometimes when I'm looking for these, and I'm like, what? I'll just exclaim right out loud. And I'll be walking around some stream. I'll be all bent over looking, and I've got my camera, and people walk by on a trail and they look at me and they're like, what you looking at? I'm like, well, if you come close and you look at the water, and I think I've told 100 people, like, well, when you look at the water real close and there's this, so more people might be looking at this now. Again, just these incredible, the colors are crazy, these little pieces in the water. And this was just a couple of weeks ago, too. And we're really close up here. This is, the small surface area, just a few inches. And that, too, was also from same day. So sometimes I'm just getting the water really abstract. And this one reminds me of a Klimt painting. This not really about that texture in the water, but again, the light and the reflection of the water. This was in Zion National Park in the stream there at the end of the canyon, off of the river. And I just loved, that light around the edge of the water, which is the reflection of the canyon walls. Late afternoon, I think.
Looks electric.
Yeah, that orange blue play gets me every time, it just vibrates. And that's similar situation also in Zion, where that orange above the leaf is a reflection of the canyon walls and the edge of the water. Ice is also part of this series. This is in Zion as well. Some of the streams that had just stayed in the shade and had some incredible ice. And then, again, the orange reflection of the canyon walls. And for all of these, I really had to be, in order to get those reflections way down close to the ground to get that.
These are still all handheld. No tripod.
This is all handheld. I love the little ice crystals around the edge of the leaf. And that one as well. You'll see the crystals, especially in that lower right-hand corner.
Are you using a high shutter speed?
Mm-hmm. Also, a high ISO, because it's not a lot of light, and just a little bit of noise reduction afterwards, and it's usually fine. Our tools have come a long way. More forms in the ice with the leaves trapped beneath. More leaf trapped beneath the ice. And, ice is, another subset of the water that I just find, really fascinating what happens in the areas where it's melting or partially melted. Here, up against the moss. It's just a little stick on the edge of the water and the little bubbles in the ice. More bubbles in the ice. Like a little cluster of grapes. Little tiny bit of ice that was melting, and that little point just hanging out over top of the water. You can see that. I like that you can see the reflection of that ice in the water below, too. Sometimes the ice just does these amazing sculptural things. They're very delicate.
1920s avant-garde sculpture.
Yes. A really crazy hood ornament, maybe. That too. So in some cases, I'm exposing these to make the water very dark, and so the ice, you don't see reflections or anything, just to really emphasize the forms of the ice. And sometimes you'll see more of the actual texture of the water itself. Just kind of depends on what I'm feeling in that image. More bubbles in the ice. It's just kind of wild, all the things that happen in it that I never noticed until I really started looking. Really crazy little details.
Hitchhiking.
Yes. That was just a couple weeks ago too. One of those really cold mornings, risking frostbite to get those little macro details. Little tiny bubbles underneath that hole in the ice. That's a very small area. And that's it.
A couple questions left.
So what I like is, so we've got 2 theme contests left this year. One was water theme, but we also have abstract.
I noticed that.
So this works both ways.
Good.
One of the things I struggle with is we're going to have this water contest, and it says, you know, water in all its forms, and the beach and the ocean and ice and steam, but it also says there can be people and other things in it. And I just wonder how, you know, what's the subject? So in these last photos, I really like the fact that you know, water was the subject, but in some of the other photos, it's really hard to tell, you know, when you know, if there's a person in the photo or a tree or a mountain, it's really hard to tell what's the subject, even if it's really foggy or, you know, so I don't know how to.
Yeah, and I will offer that since I happen to be the judge for the water theme, when I'm judging a competition that has a theme, I will often note when the photograph seems to be about the subject of the theme, or when it seems like more of a supporting element in the photo. Like, you know, and I think in a case where you really can't tell if it's water at all, if it's super abstract and you don't have any indication, any clue that it's water you're looking at, it might be tough for it to win a competition, because if it's so super abstract that we have no clue that it's water, other than the fact that, you know, you're showing it in that competition, it might be tough, you know. I think that's where a little less abstraction can be good. You know, when you have a themed, you know, something that you're submitting to, you want to be sure that there's something that the viewer can hang on to and say, oh, that's water. I think that would be, you know, and then again, you know, something too that's got people in it or whatever. I think the action needs to be surrounded on the water. The image needs to be about the water in some way or another. And I think that's kind of, you know, everybody will have their own threshold, you know, but that's kind of where I am with that sort of thing. Does that help at all?
Sure.
Judges are will be judges.
Yeah, I know. Judge is going to judge.
One of our online viewers asked, do you name your photos?
I try because, you know, for exhibition purposes, you know, you don't want to have a whole show of Untitled 1, Untitled 2, Untitled 12, Untitled 13. That's, you know, sometimes they come really easily and sometimes they don't. And I struggle with that because I don't like to be too literal, but I also don't want to be too esoteric either.
Any other questions?
Yes, if people want to see your work, where can they go? I mean, in person.
In person. In person. Right now, the Bromo Seltzer Tower is where my studio is, and that's currently the only place where anything is up. And if anybody wants to come by the Bromo Tower, probably not this Saturday, but the building is open to visitors every Saturday from 11 to 4. I am not there every Saturday. None of the artists come in every Saturday. But if you plan to come by, it's great because they're artist studios. You can, you know, visit whoever's there, see their work. You can get a tour of the clock tower, go up to the clock room. The clock room is very cool, very, you know, steampunk, you know, inner workings of the clock kind of thing. But if you want to come by there and plan to come on a Saturday, shoot me an email at the address there on the screen and let me know, and I'll make a point to be there if you're going to come visit, because like I said, I'm not there every time. I'm going away for a little bit for a week in February. I'm going to go out to Joshua Tree, and then April, I think, if our plans do not change, my husband and I are going to Japan. So we'll work around those times if you want to come plan a visit.
Any other questions?
See the one on the boat again?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. We're gonna bring some stuff up here, but we're gonna end the stream. Don't forget, next week is our last print contest, open theme. And if you are just a paid member, remember we do half dues after the new year. So I think it's something like 36 images left for $20. That's almost 50 cents an image to get your images judged by very accomplished judges. So think about that, and we'll see everybody next week. Be careful this weekend if you go to our field trip. Good night.